Hi everybody, Debbie Hoyt here with this week's blog about anxiety and what it is. Um, Before I start, this video is going to be a bit longer than usual. I know I mentioned that I was going to try to keep these videos like to 5 to 7 minutes, but talking today about anxiety and what it does inside one's body is going to be a little bit longer than, take me more than just 5 minutes to share that with you. Secondly, I've had some students that have come up to me and said, "Oh, I've watched your video, I watched the blogs, and I brought it to my parents." Um, these videos I do make kid safe, so feel free to watch these videos with your kids because it can definitely start some great discussions. Uh, one of the things that we're talking about now is anxiety, what happens, and worry. What happens when we're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, worried for all sorts of different reasons. And so sometimes for a lot of students and a lot of people, just understanding what goes on in your body can help understand how we're going to deal with adversity. So a lot of the information I'm getting today, there's an article off of Hey Sigmund that I'm going to use over the next couple of weeks. And also Lynn Lyons, who is a counselor who specializes in anxiety. So I am not good with editing. So some people are like, oh, I'm going to have the link here and the link there. That's not me. So I'm going to attach the links. So hopefully they'll come up in the newsletter kind of underneath this link in your newsletter. But it's lyonsnewhampshire.com in case you want to look her up. And then the article is about school anxiety, and it's from heysigmund.com. So just looking at my notes over there. Um, so what I'm going to talk about today is anxiety, and if anybody's been to any of Lynn Lyons' talks, they've seen her kind of do this and talk about this. You can purchase there's a half-hour video that goes through this, but also how to deal with anxiety. So you can go to her website to take a look at kind of how all her actions and everything that she does it. So I'm, definitely want to give her credit for this information today. So when we deal with adversity, no matter what it's from, we feel worried, we feel stressed, we feel anxious. It's not okay to take that away. And this is kind of what I was talking about a little bit last week about saving the kids, because we absolutely need worry, we need stress, we need anxiety. It's actually very helpful to us and it keeps us alive sometimes. But at the same time, you don't want to totally get rid of it, but at the same time, we don't want it to control us. So we need worry. We don't want to totally get rid of it, but how do we deal with anxiety? Because right now we see a lot of kids that the anxiety and the worry and the stress kind of takes over. So it's really important to understand that worry, anxiety, stress, they want two things. The first thing is they want certainty. They want to know exactly how things are going to go, exact what's going to happen. That's what it wants. It wants certainty. It also wants comfort. It wants the individual to feel good. We would all love to kind of sit underneath the nice warm blankets on these colder days, on our couch watching some sort of movie or listening to music or reading a book. But we know in reality we just can't do that. We have to face it every single day. So we kind of have this the frontal cortex, which is right here, and the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like right behind it in our brain. That uses imagination. And we know with kids and adolescents and even many adults, imagination can be a great tool. It can be a great coping mechanism. But when it comes to anxiety and worry, it takes over and it feeds into another area of our brain that's in the back, and it seriously is about the size of an almond, like you think your thumb right there. It is that big. It's called the amygdala. And so the prefrontal cortex is kind of our talking area that we can rationalize, we can start to talk a little bit. The amygdala, we have some control over, but it's a very primitive area of our brain and it just reacts, which is hard. So we'll be thinking something and the amygdala does it. So it's really important to understand how worry works. It's also important to understand how our imagination reacts to the amygdala and how worry uses our imagination to its benefit, not necessarily to ours. So what happens is you have this worry, and it may be a very benign worry like, oh my goodness, I have to go to work today, or oh, I got to go to school today if it's a student. So the amygdala then doesn't care why, and this is why we really don't have to talk about the why you're anxious, because there's always going to be something. Why you're stressed, there's always going to be something that we're stressed or worried about. The amygdala just realizes that the prefrontal cortex has something in its head, and it immediately reacts. It lets our body know of danger. So there's a few things that happens. One, it sends a message down to an area kind of in our back on our kidneys called the adrenal glands, and it sends out all these chemicals throughout our body, which in real times of danger can be very helpful to us. So it takes all the blood and basically puts it to our big muscle groups so we can run away or we can fight. We start to feel, kids will talk about starting to feel queasy and having stomach aches. That's because the body automatically takes away the blood supply from kind of those non-essential organs in order to get it into that big muscle groups, because we need oxygen and we need all our power in those big muscle groups, according to the amygdala, in order to fight whatever it is that our brain is thinking. It helps us get ready for that danger. People sometimes talk about feeling dizzy or feeling lightheaded. That's because a couple things happen. One, our oxygen does go to those big muscle groups. The blood goes to the big muscle groups. Two, we start not to breathe as well as we normally do. Our breaths become not as deep. They become more shallow. In all honesty, sometimes because of the way the body kind of goes into an automatic mode, that energy gets dispersed elsewhere. Our reaction times actually become shorter. So that's good. So you can react much more quickly. We become stronger people. We become faster people. All of this is very good when we are indeed in danger. But when we're not in danger, this isn't really helpful and it feels awful. And so what happens is the body begins to take over itself, and we don't like it. The amygdala, again, doesn't care why. It doesn't know. It just gets a signal, and then it's triggered. So we have a lot of these quote unquote false alarms that makes our body think that we're in danger when indeed we're not. So the more we listen to kind of this worry, the bigger it's going to get. And that's kind of hard because there's something automatically going on within our bodies that you would think you don't have control over, but you actually do. So there's a few things that we're going to be discussing kind of over the next few weeks of how do we deal with this anxiety. So the first thing that we talked about, we talked a little bit about last week and this week again, you have to expect that worry is going to happen. Worry is going to happen every day for the rest of our lives. There's going to be a gazillion reasons why it happens, and it's going to be different for every person. There are going to be small glitches that happen that people worry about, and then there's going to be big catastrophic events, which are very appropriate to worry and stress and have anxiety about. So the first thing to do is to expect anxiety. It is going to show up. We're going to have it. The next piece that's one thing that we have to do is we have to externalize anxiety. So not keep going through our head of the whys. And this is what I talked about last week is those hows. Okay, we have anxiety, we have stress, we have worry. How are we going to get through this? How are we going to not so much overcome, but how are we going to move on and still accomplish what we need to accomplish for the day or for this task? The last piece you need to do, which is really hard, you have to experiment to know that worry, anxiety, or the amygdala, whatever you want to call it, is not in charge. worry is not in charge of us. We're in charge. And this is where we need to involve our prefrontal cortex to have kind of these conversations with the amygdala that we're in charge. Like, yes, we hear you say that you think there's danger, but guess what? There's not. And so we're going to talk about those kind of strategies over the next few weeks, as to how to cope with anxiety. How do we externalize it? But I think as parents and for any students who are watching this, we all have it. It's a part of our lives. It is very beneficial in times of danger. Um, it is also beneficial in keeping us safe. But we also have to begin to expect that anxiety is going to happen. And we need to kind of ride that anxiety wave. How do we get through that other side? Because it will build up. And at some point, you're going to develop those coping skills and coping mechanisms. And I think this is kind of where people misunderstand medications, because I hear a lot of times students have anxiety, they have worries, and they'll talk about, oh, I took my medication, I don't know why it's not working. Your body still goes through the same thing. Just because it may not be as dramatic, but you're still going to have those same feelings. People talk about feeling, I hear a lot of students talk about feeling kind of numb. You still have, without kind of that cognitive piece, that thinking piece, the worry and the anxiety and the stress is still there. It may not be as extreme, but it's still going to be there. In all honesty, your body's still going to try to do the same thing, the pills to kind of take the medications down. But we're going to, but kind of the thoughts are still there, so the body still tries to process the information the same way. The amygdala doesn't recognize medications in there. So that's something else to think about too, because you want to make sure to include a thinking piece as this, which we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. So that's all for today. As I said, Lynn Lyons has some great information in empowering your children when they're dealing with school anxiety. The Sigmund, the author of that is Karen Young, and it's on the Hey Sigmund webpage. So those are two great resources that you can look at and hopefully get yourself some information. So I hope everybody has a good week, and thanks for watching.